Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ADEA CAAPID webinar on avoiding common application mistakes. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ebony Harris, and I'm the Senior Manager of Specialized Application Services at ADEA. I'm joined by Marci Colb from the University of Colorado School of Dental Medicine.
Hello.
During today's webinar, we will be sharing information on how to prevent common application mistakes for the 2020 ADEA CAAPID application cycle, which starts on March 5th, 2019. Some of the tips that we'll be sharing today will provide you with information on how to streamline the process for requesting official records, how to add background information in the application, as well as how to properly provide letters of evaluation. Once we conclude these topics, we will open the floor for Q&A so we can answer direct questions. The first topic we're going to discuss is requesting official records. The official records that are accepted by ADEA CAAPID are the Transcript Evaluations, TOEFL scores, MBDE Part 1 and Part 2 results, and ADEA scores. Many applicants struggle with providing official records and official information to programs prior to the program deadline. This step may be forgotten by many because in the application, applicants are able to self-report information in the academic history section, as well as the standardized test section. But it's important to remember that in addition to self-reporting, programs also want to receive official information. So I'll provide some background on that. To provide programs with official academic information, applicants must provide programs with information from WES or the ECE. ADEA CAAPID requires applicants to submit transcript evaluations. And again, that's through WES and ECE, but it's important to note that each program has its specific requirements on who should provide that information. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to identify that. The transcript evaluation provides a course-by-course evaluation report of the dental degree. So what that essentially does is validate your credentials. So this is an imperative part of the application. The process for providing standardized test information is similar to the transcript process. Applicants can self-report some information, but they must go to the ADA to provide official MBDE Part 1 and Part 2 results, as well as ADEA scores. Applicants often forget that. This year in the application, we're providing a link to the ADA website so applicants can navigate directly from the CAAPID application to the ADA website where they can submit their requests for their MBDE Part 1 and Part 2 results or ADEA scores. The next thing that is important to note is that the official TOEFL scores have to come from the ETS. In order to provide your scores to CAAPID programs, you have to provide the correct institution code. The institution code for ADEA CAAPID is the letter B, the number 451, and it's B451, American Dental Education Association, ADEA CAAPID. Now that you know what the challenge is related to providing official records and also some background information on how to deliver that, I'm going to ask Marci to speak about some tips on streamlining that process during this cycle.
Thanks, Ebony. I think the biggest thing I would recommend first is just to make sure that you have enough time to perform all of these functions. So the problem that we see a lot of times is that the records are not requested enough prior to the deadline to make it to the CAAPID application in time. So for example, with TOEFL, they typically require at least a week in order to get your scores posted, and then ADEA CAAPID sometimes takes a couple days. So you want to make sure you have at least 2 weeks in general, although that could be more or less time needed, but 2 weeks is a good amount of time to think about getting your test scores ordered and getting your transcripts to ADEA CAAPID. The other thing is that just be reminded that your test results are not available right away. So that does take some time as well. So just make sure you're pre-planning well enough in order to get that information. Additionally, make sure you're looking at the ADEA CAAPID directory, because each school requires different items as they are asking for them. So for example, some schools will require ECE only, and other schools will require both an ECE and a WES transcript. And some schools will only require a WES transcript. So you want to make sure that you understand all the requirements for the specific schools you're applying to, and that is done from the ADEA CAAPID directory. And lastly, instead of emailing the schools specifically or calling the schools, it's much better to just confirm and track your records in your online portal for CAAPID. So you are able to see when those documents and test scores are received, and just make sure you check that before you contact the schools to see if they were received, because the schools won't see it before you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those tips, Marci. The next topic that we're going to discuss is experiences. Background experiences are an important part of the application because they show the applicant's skills and abilities. Many applicants struggle with this part of the application because they don't complete it. They instead upload a resume or a CV. Now, some programs may require a resume or a CV, so you would want to share that information, but it's important to also enter specific details about your experiences in the application. This application should provide programs with information that's related to your dental degree, whether that experience took place in your home country, in the United States or Canada. It's important to list all of that information in the application and provide a CV if it's required by the program. Marci is going to provide some tips on how to properly complete the experience section.
Thanks. So the first thing to do is to select the correct experience type. And on each of the ADEA CAAPID application pages, you have a link that you can access that will talk about what a certain type of experience means. So for example, when we say dental related experience, we do mean all dental related experiences in that section that would be considered above and beyond continuing education. So for example, if you've worked as a dentist in your home country, that would be a dental experience, whether that was volunteer or paid or for academic credit. All of those would be considered a dental experience. Employment would be considered non-dental experiences where you were employed. So just make sure you're reading the directions on the link that's on the page that talks about each experience type, and select the appropriate experience type as it correlates with what you actually did. Another thing is, when we talk about volunteer experiences, typically we're speaking of very short-term dental experiences. So maybe you went to a dental camp for 3 hours or something like that. Or we're talking about things like volunteering at a Red Cross Center, or volunteering at a church or something like that. So we're not talking about observing dental experiences typically in that section. We do want you to enter each experience only once. So sometimes what we see is something like you taught at an institution, but you also were technically, performing some dental work. So you would not put that in dental related experience and teaching. You would just list that once. And the way I would figure that out is I would basically, what you felt like you most thoroughly concentrated on is where I would put that experience. So if the focus of that job was teaching, then you would put it in the teaching section. If the focus of that job was research, you would put it in the research section. And if you were really, truly performing dental work as that type of job, I would put it in the dental experience section. And then lastly, to put everything in what we call reverse chronological order. So we do ask that you list experiences in the most recent first and then the oldest last. And that helps us understand what you're doing currently and what you've done most recently, et cetera. So we often see applications where there's an experience from 2018, and then an experience from 2006, and then an experience from 2015. And it's hard for us to tell where you were when. So if you can help streamline that by putting them with the most recent experience first and then everything after in order, that would be great.
Awesome. And I'd also like to add that this year in the application, applicants will be able to mark their most important experiences, up to 4 of them. So you will be able to, applicants will be able to select 4 experiences to indicate that they are their most important, so they stand out to programs when viewing the application. This will be a new enhancement for the 2020 application cycle. The next area that we see applicants struggle with is letters of evaluation. ADEA CAAPID allows applicants to submit up to 3 letters of evaluation. While letters of evaluation are not required to submit the application, most programs require 2 letters of evaluation. This process is automated, and that's what most applicants struggle with. In the application, the applicant will be prompted to enter their letter of evaluation's author's information. And what that does is it triggers a process that sends the author an email and information to access the evaluator's portal, where they will then upload the letter of evaluation on the behalf of the applicant. It's important to note that the applicant will be entering the letter author's information, and they will receive an email providing them with instructions on how to upload that document. ADEA CAAPID does not accept letters that are mailed to their office. Everything is done automated. So it's important to make your letter author aware to be on the lookout for that email that will provide them with instructions to upload the letter. Now, Marci will provide some tips on how to streamline that process and make sure it's successful.
Yeah, so the first thing that you want to do so that your evaluations are submitted in a timely fashion is you want to tell the evaluator when they are probably going to get an email to fill out the evaluation or to upload the evaluation. So make sure you're telling the evaluator when they can expect the email from CAAPID. Additionally, if schools require specific information, you want to make sure that you're telling the evaluator early enough exactly what is needed for the school so that they're submitting letters that the school will accept. One of these things is official letterhead and a signature. So a lot of times schools will not accept letters that don't have letterhead. Different schools have different information about what they mean about letterhead, but oftentimes that's a logo of wherever you knew the evaluator from or where they are currently. And it always includes contact information such as phone number, email, and physical address. And then you also want to make sure that if the school requires a signature on the letter, that the recommender knows that that is the case. Again, I will recommend that you look at the ADEA CAAPID directory and you look at school-specific instructions in this regard, because, for example, the University of Colorado doesn't even use CAAPID letters. So you want to make sure that any letters that you're sending meet the requirements of that specific school and how to send them and how to upload them in CAAPID, etc. Likewise, as far as your due date is concerned, you could be held responsible for getting your letters on time to the school. So at the University of Colorado, if we don't receive letters by this Friday, the application cycle that is the past application cycle, then we won't look at your application. So you want to make sure that you're setting a deadline with your recommender as early as possible so that they're fulfilling that requirement in a timely fashion. And then lastly, this is the same for almost everything that you're doing. Make sure you check your status in CAAPID, in your CAAPID portal of the letters being received, and touch base with your recommender if those have not been received. A lot of times we get calls from applicants asking if they've gotten the letters, and we actually won't have them before you see them tracked. So just make sure that anything that can be checked for tracking in ADEA CAAPID portal, make sure you're doing the tracking yourself.
Thank you, Marci. Those are helpful, great tips. So those cover the main tips that we were going to discuss today. Now we're going to be taking a look at what questions have been submitted by participants. I'll go ahead and read them out loud and then we'll answer them. So continue to submit your questions as we go. The first question we have says, can we discuss which sections of the application will get erased before March 1st and which sections get carried over? So first, I'd like to highlight that the ADEA CAAPID application cycle starts on March 5th. This year, the application cycle will start on March 5th. And for applicants that are reapplying, meaning they've previously submitted an application, they will have an option to carry over information from the current cycle to the next cycle. In order to do that, the applicant must have applied to at least one program during the cycle. I'm going to take a look at the next question. The next question reads, if we order the official records now, will it be carried over to the application when it opens in March? So the best way to request records is wait until your cycle is starting. So on March 5th, that will be the best time to begin requesting your official records, whether that will be your MBD results, or your ADEA scores or TOEFL scores, even your transcript evaluations. You want to begin requesting that information during the cycle that you're going to be using it. So requesting it now would not be beneficial. We have another question. When will the new directory be published? That's a great question. So the current cycle concludes on February 22nd. At that time, you will then begin seeing the new directory profiles being updated and available. Another thing that you can also look at is the directories have links to programs' actual websites that may be already updated. So if you want to get a head start and find out what programs are going to be requiring for next cycle, you can visit the actual website of that program by clicking on the link that's within the directory. Great question. We have a question about experiences. If possible, I'm going to direct to you for this one, Marci. Being a TA/demonstrator is considered which type of experience?
I would consider that teaching.
Awesome. So TA/demonstrator would be considered a teaching experience. And again, if you're looking for clarity on those things, the actual application instructions provides a description of each experience type. The next question is, in the total number of hours in experience section, can we account for estimating future hours we will be working or volunteering? Go ahead, Marci.
Okay. No, you should not estimate anything in the future ever, basically. So one thing I should also mention that I didn't mention in the bullet points I forgot to was as it relates to experiences, all that the schools are interested in is anything that happened in your bachelor program and beyond. So the programs are not interested in hearing about your high school experiences or activities you performed in high school, even if those were dentally related. So make sure that you're having your experiences after your bachelor's degree. You can mention that you might be doing an experience in the future, but typically that's not in the experience section. Typically that would be in something like your personal statement or in a university specific question where you would be answering something that says, you know, what else is there that we should know about your application? That's where you would want to put any future activities that you have not performed yet, because you haven't performed them, so the hours would not be accurate. But also, since it came up, I'd like to just mention that we do see a lot of people who don't quite understand the hours per week and how many weeks you are at an activity. So just make sure that when you're completing your hours per week that they're realistic. So sometimes we see things like 100 hours per week amongst 4 or 5 activities, which is typically not something that happens. And also we often see something like someone starting a job in 2015 and it says to present, which we assume is March 1st of 2019 or beyond. So if someone started something in 2019 and we see something like they were there for 3 weeks, that confuses us because in theory you were there for almost 200 weeks if you were there for 4 years. So just make sure you're calculating your weeks correctly and that you're calculating your hours correctly in that manner, because sometimes that can be confusing.
Awesome. The next question reads, can we get all letters of recommendation from the U.S. instead of home country of education? With that, each program has specified what their letter of evaluation requirements are. So to determine that, you would definitely want to look at the ADEA CAAPID directory. They outline what their letter of evaluation requirements are. Some programs may not have a problem with that, but then some may want some from the home country. So you would just have to do research, and that varies on what program you're applying to. Do you want to add anything to that, Marci?
Yeah, sure. So I would typically venture to guess that you would be required to have some sort of letter from the bachelor school that you attended. So where you did your bachelor degree in dentistry, I would say typically speaking, and that may not be universal, but typically speaking, programs are requiring that. What I would also say is that at least at the University of Colorado, and this may not be for other schools, but at the University of Colorado, we do require a school letter. It does not have to be a dean's letter, but does need to be a faculty or a dean, but the dean is not the requirement. And additionally, one thing of note is that occasionally we do understand circumstances beyond your control for those letters. So if there's, for example, a school that's shut down and you can't get a letter from that school, you should touch base with the program specifically and talk through that with them, and they can make a determination as to whether or not we can figure something else out.
Got it. Our next question is, when does the application cycle end? The current application cycle ends on February 22nd, 2019. On March 5th, we will open the new application cycle, and that will conclude on February 21st, 2020. Those are the dates for the application cycles.
And Ebony, can I just add that, again, looking at the directory and also looking at the CAAPID application is important in that regard, because programs don't open their application for that entire time. They open within that time frame. So for example, the University of Colorado typically opens from September through February 15th. So just make sure you're looking. So we don't open in March. You can't apply to us in March. On March 5th, you will not be able to apply to the University of Colorado. So just make sure you're looking at the directory again for specific dates, which the cycle is open for the specific schools.
Yes, that's a very good point. The next question is also related to letters of evaluation. It says the evaluation letters submitted from the last cycle, can they be the same for the new cycle, or do I have to ask for new recommendation letters in the new cycle? If you choose, the applicant can choose to use the same letters. They can ask those same evaluators to provide that letter again, but the applicant also has the option to ask new evaluators to provide new letters as well. The next question is, if I have filled out my checklist in preparation for the application, but have not applied, will the information remain in this site, or do I have to redo everything after March 5th? So the only way that information will carry over to the new application cycle starting on March 5th is if the applicant has already applied to at least one program. So in order to carry information over from one application cycle to the next, the applicant would have to submit to at least one program. Right. For the next question. The next question is related to experience. Does 3 days volunteering in a dental camp come under dental related experience or volunteer experience? Marci, based off of your judgment, what would you say?
That's a good question. I mean, there are some gray areas of these experiences. I personally would put that under volunteering because it's pretty short term. And I think when we think about dental related experiences, at least for me, I think about longer term things, observing for a month, working in a clinic for 2 years, those sorts of things. So that's what I think of typically when I'm thinking about dental related experiences. But I think that is a small gray area, but I would put it in volunteering.
Got it. Okay, another question is it possible to start filling the application before March 5th, or do we have to wait until then? If you're applying in the 2020 cycle, March 5th is the date to begin filling out the application. The application will not become available until March 5th, and in that time, you can begin completing it. Okay, the next question. The next question is, will there be a separate section for CDE this year? I'm assuming we're talking about the CE credits. So this year in the application, there is not a separate section for CE information.
Can I just add something there, Ebony?
Please do.
So we were seeing that this past year when we removed that people were putting their CE into their education section and also into their dental related experience section. My suggestion would be that if it's a long-term CE, for example, a 6-month preceptorship or something like that, to continue to put that into the dental experience section. If it's a short-term 3-hour item, it is very hard for us to read 20 of those in the dental experience section or understand what they really are in the education section. So my thought would be, if you are able to submit a resume, that you actually put those on your resume as CE and kind of list them all together, and it will make it much easier for the schools to see what actually happened with your CE credits.
Yes, thank you for adding that. The next question is, hello, when I start on March 5th, my application, do I have to put all of the programs that I want to apply, or can I add later a program? Yes, March, you initially start your application, the system will prompt you to select a program first. You can always go in and add programs at a later time. Using the Add Program tab at the top of the application, you can see what programs are open and still accepting applications, and you can always add them after the March 5th date. You can add them throughout the cycle.
And just as another FYI around that, for example, you will not be able to add the University of Colorado until September. So, so just remember that if a program cycle isn't open, you won't be able to add them until that cycle does open.
Okay. Thank you. Marci, would you be able to speak to what official records carry over for reapplicants?
Sure. So it's my understanding, and I'm not 100% on this, but it's my understanding that official TOEFL does in fact carry over into the new cycle, and I believe that to be true for official MBD. Now, yeah, I don't know about the ADAT, but I assume that would operate the same way. And with that, the thing that you want to be conscientious of is updates. So if you had only passed part 1 in the previous cycle, you do want to make sure and submit a new MBDE, because that would not reflect part 2 if you submitted it before you took it. Or like if you got a better TOEFL score, you want to make sure and request that again. I think Ebony also already answered the rest of that, but with the course by course evaluation, I do believe that that can carry over as well.
Yes, that is correct. Okay. The next question is, how do I upload a dental license? Should it be scanned or uploaded? So each program has different requirements about what additional documents they would like to see outside of the application. And if a program requires that, there will be a document upload slot in the program materials section of the application, where you'll have instructions on and actually a place to upload that information.
Yeah, and I think there was a slight confusion on that, because you would need to scan or take a picture of something in order to upload. So I think you would need to do both based on your question.
Yes, thank you. Does MBD exam attempts matter in the decision process?
So each school is going to look at that differently. If you have a large concern, you probably want to address your concern specifically with the individual school. I can tell you that for the University of Colorado, sometimes it makes a difference and sometimes it doesn't. So we do what's called a holistic application review, and based upon your various strengths and areas for improvement is how we base our decisions. So if you have a very strong application and maybe you had to take part 2 twice, that may not impact you as much as if you have a weaker application and you had to take it twice.
Yes. The next question is, can we update the information we have submitted to a school before we send it to another school? So once the application is submitted, there are very minimal things that can be edited or revised. So just to clarify that question, I'll just go ahead and list what you can change after submission. So after submission, you will be able to make updates to your name, phone number, or email, your visa status. You are able to add new achievements, experiences, and license. If there are any new standardized tests scores available, you're able to provide that information, as well as adding additional programs or any optional documents that programs may have in the program materials section. You'll be able to upload that after submission. So after submission, there are very few things that you're able to change. So you want to make sure your application is as final as it can be before submitting to any program. Okay, let's continue to submit your questions. We have a few left. In the research experience section, if we researched with a dentist in his clinic, what should be in the organization name?
Is the research for the clinic, do you think? If the research is for the clinic specifically, then I would list the clinic. If it is a project that dentist is doing with another organization, I would list that other organization.
The next question is, what is the meaning of notarized copy, and by who should be signing specifically? Could you speak to that, Marci?
Sure. So a notary public is someone who has been legally deemed as someone who can verify certain legal aspects of things. And that can be a variety of things, at least in the US, but oftentimes it relates to documents. So when we ask for a notary, what we're asking is basically for someone official, so someone legally official, typically not your school, because there are notaries at your school, but like at the University of Colorado, we would not accept a notary from our school. But like, for example, in the US, there are bankers who have, all banks have notary publics. And what that means is that when you bring something to a notary public, they can say that first they verify your identification to make sure that you are who you say you are, which makes the documentation slightly more legitimate. And secondly, they can legally sign a document saying it is what it is based on what they know. So for example, at the University of Colorado, we require a notarized dental degree as a part of our supplemental application. So what this means is that you will present your original dental degree to a notary public, and the notary public will take a photocopy, or maybe you'll have brought them a photocopy, but what they do is they sign on that document saying that it is a true and exact copy of the original document. So this helps us to understand, without you having to send your dental degree physically, it helps us to understand that it's a legitimate degree and not a fake. So that's basically what it is. Each school is going to have different policies on that. And one thing that we do see a lot of is that certain countries call their notaries something slightly different. So the first thing you should look for is a notary. And then if your country doesn't have notaries, then what you want to do is you want to try and find the person who would act in that place of the notary.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is, does CAAPID also need an official transcript from the University of Study from home country, or just ECE evaluation of the transcript only? So ADEA CAAPID is only looking for the transcript evaluation, and that could be from ECE or WES depending on the program requirements. There is no need to provide an official transcript from the actual university. We're just looking for the evaluation from ECE or WES. Next question. The next question is, this is a good one. Would our rotational internship need to be included, or would we need to mention it because it's a part of our graduation requirement? Go ahead. Would you like to speak to that?
So if anything was required by your dental school, you should not mention that as a part of an additional experience. So for example, in India, we know that there is a one-year rotational internship that's required of all graduates. So for example, if you are from India and have graduated in India, you would not put that in a dental related experience because that was a requirement for graduation. The same could be said for something like a dental camp. So if you were required to do something in a dental camp, that would not be an additional experience. The one caveat I would say for that is if you've done some postgraduate work, so if you have a master's degree, you probably should mention the research that you carried out during that master's degree if you carried out research.
Yes, thank you for adding those details. The next question is, can we add new experiences after cycle starts? Yes, so once your application is submitted, you are able to add new experiences and new achievements. You cannot add previously entered, but you may add additional experiences and achievements after submission. What is the process for updating new TOEFL scores in the middle of a cycle? So the one step that the applicant could do is self-report it, but then to provide the new official score, you would have to submit a request to ETS. Do you have anything to add there, Marci?
I do. So the one thing to also make sure of is that the administrators at the different schools are looking at your application at different times. So for example, they may have already looked at your application before you sent in an updated TOEFL or ADAT or MBDE, whatever the case may be. So make sure that the school also knows that that has been updated, because sometimes that could get missed.
Yes. Okay.
And that's just if you've already applied to the school. It would not be for a new application. So for example, the University of Colorado has a later cycle. So if you haven't applied to the University of Colorado and you submit updated scores from another school that you applied to, you would not need to touch base with us about that. You would just want to touch base with the school you already applied to.
Correct. Our next question reads, if I'm working at the dental office and working with two dentists, can I get both recommendation in one letter? Would you prefer as a program, Marci, to see that separate, or would it be okay to have two dentists in one recommendation?
That's a very interesting question. I think the answer to that is somewhat nuanced, but so I would say the biggest thing to think about when you're submitting letters is to have an array of experiences that you think are most important, and to have letters that support those experiences. So for example, if the school only allows you to have 2 letters total, and you want to have one from your school, which might be important, and you want to have one from the dental clinic, then I would encourage you to have both of those dentists write the letter. But if you need to have 3 letters and you think that each of those recommenders could provide different insight, then maybe it should be separate letters. So I think it just depends on how you view the well-roundedness of your letters and what's required from the schools.
That's all good. Thank you for that. Our next question is, if we attend a dental conference, does it count as an experience? And if so, what kind of experience?
So I would, in general, consider conference attendance as continuing education, because that's in professional development. So again, if you are required to submit a resume, I would include that information on your resume. I'm not sure I would include it in an experience under dental related experiences. I think that's where the water gets muddy, which I don't know if everybody knows that expression, but I think that's where, you know, the more things you list, the harder it is for us to read. So if you can be succinct about that, there is a CAAPID question that asks, like, what else do we need to know about your application? And that would be an appropriate place to put that.
That was a great segue, because the next question was, what do I put in the other relevant information section? So that's a great example.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, the other relevant information is to really use that spot to say anything that you think that the reader needs to know about your application that isn't otherwise said. So a lot of times we see things that are already listed in somewhere in your application repeated in that question. I would say anytime you think about repeating something in your application, don't do it. Never repeat anything, because these applications are long and we just want to read it once. We'll get it the first time we read it. So just list everything once. But if there's something that you can't list, that would be appropriate. Additionally, what I would use that section for, if it were me, is things like why I might have a gap in my experience for 5 years, or why I don't have a letter from my school if I've chosen not to submit a letter from my school, or why I might have lower GPA than someone else. Something like that is what I might submit in that section.
Yes, thank you for sharing those examples. Our next question is related to letters of evaluation. Usually, how old should the letter of evaluation be to be considered competitive? I'm assuming, like, how do you consider a letter that may be outdated? Like, what is that time frame? Do you have any ideas on that, Marci?
Yeah. So each program is going to have very specific guidelines on the date by which you can submit a letter. At the University of Colorado, we actually removed our date restriction about, I think, 2 years ago. So what we require now is for the letter to have a date, but we don't require that to be within a specific time frame. And the reason for that is because we know many of you graduated college 5, 10, 20 years ago, and it was hard for you to get a new letter from that school. So we've removed that requirement. However, I will say that outside of your school letter, the more recent and closely related to dentistry letters you have, probably, I think most schools would think the better. So we are looking to see relatively recent letters for you, but again, you want to evaluate that alongside your well-roundedness of letters. So for example, if you left your home country 5 years ago and then worked at a grocery store for 4 years and then started observing again, I would probably consider submitting the letter from 5 years ago over the grocery letter just because it's slightly more relevant.
Thank you. Our next question is, what is the deadline to get the official documents? So each program has its own application deadline, and you can view that information in the ADEA CAAPID program directory, and that deadline will tell you when you need to have all of your official documents to that program. So it varies from program to program, but the ADEA CAAPID directory will show you what that deadline date is.
And just to add in while you're looking at a next question, I think sometimes with deadlines, people think that the deadline doesn't apply to them. And so at least at the University of Colorado, our deadline is very serious. So again, my suggestion to you would be to pre-plan as much as possible. And if you can't make the deadline for a particular program, maybe this year was not the year for you to apply to that program, because I do know that exceptions are made very, very rarely and for very extenuating circumstances. So just make sure you're pre-planning enough to get everything in by the deadline, and that includes anything the school requests specifically, because deadlines in the US are more serious and most likely you won't be given exceptions.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question is about waiving the right to view a LOR. So the question is kind of generic, so I'm just going to assume that you're wondering what is the meaning of that and how it's perceived by the program if you decide not to waive your right. Marci, could you talk about that?
Sure. So as it relates to letters of recommendation, there is an assumption that's made that if you have viewed the letter, or if the person writing the recommendation for you allows you to see the letter, that they may not be able to be as truthful about your skills and abilities and characteristics as if you've seen the letter. So one thing about waiving the right to see the letter is an assessment of, do we know that this letter is as truthful as it can be, or can we make some assumptions there? So that's one. And then two is that there are some laws in the United States that require us to ask that question, because if you become a student at the university, we may or may not be able to release that document based on your waiver. So for example, if you do not waive your right to see the letter, then we make the assumption that maybe you have seen the letter or plan to see the letter in the future. So again, it's not necessarily always the case that you might have had input in that letter or that the person could be less truthful, but sometimes an assumption is made in that regard. So you want to only not waive your rights to the letters if you are able to. So for example, occasionally someone will just hand you a letter. It's really important to be truthful in this situation of whether or not you've seen the letter. So if you have seen the letter, then definitely don't waive your right. If you plan to see the letter in the future, don't waive your right. And this is really just an assessment of ethics as well. So just make sure you're answering that question truthfully. And if for some reason you feel like you need to explain why you didn't waive your right, that other relevant information section might be an appropriate place.
Very helpful. Our next question is there a specific format for the letter of evaluation? So earlier today, we touched on some of the standards for a letter of evaluation, like a logo, having the contact information of the letter evaluator, but there is no specific format of how it should be actually written. There are just some recommendations on how it should be presented, meaning that logo and contact information, but there is not a specific format. In the achievements section, do award-winning presentations at conferences come under presentations or awards? I want to say that's another one where you can just use your best judgment. It sounds like it could kind of fall into both categories. So you can determine which one is most appropriate and how you want that information to be presented to the program. All right. So the next question is related to reapplicants. Can we edit the information that's carried forward from one cycle to another? That is, the answer to that is yes. If you have applied during the current cycle and you decide to transfer information from your current application to the new application, you do have the ability to edit and revise that information.
And just a tip there with that, it would be highly recommended to remain as consistent as possible from one application to the other. So if you started a job in September in your previous application, and then you remembered, no, I actually started that job in August, then you should list August, but in the other relevant information you want to then say, I mistakenly listed September last year, but my real start date was August, so that we're not, and the same thing with hours. So like I said, we do see work experience hours sometimes not utilized correctly. So if you learned over the course of a cycle that in fact you had underestimated your hours or overestimated your hours, in the current cycle, I would edit that, but I would make sure to explain somewhere why that has changed.
Does the TOEFL score make a huge difference in the application process? Most programs do have TOEFL score requirements. In the ADEA CAAPID directory, a lot of the programs will outline what is the minimum score requirement for each section. So I would use that as a reference when considering what programs to apply to. I would say it is an essential part of the application that is very important. So you want to make sure that you're meeting those requirements. Marci, feel free to add.
So to add on to that, a couple of things. One is, again, we often get the question about, I did US schooling, can I have an exception, et cetera, et cetera. And usually when a school lists a requirement that, and they sometimes, like we say on our website, we don't make exceptions, which we don't. So just make sure before you ask the school for an exception that you understand that most likely you're not going to get an exception. And then as far as the scores are concerned, I would say that we have seen over the course of the past year a significant increase in TOEFL scores, so higher than our minimum is required. And I would also say that it really, again, depends on the well-roundedness of your application, at least for the University of Colorado. So if your TOEFL score is lower, but you have strengths in a lot of other areas, then your TOEFL score may not matter as much. But if you have weaknesses in a lot of areas or areas where you aren't as strong, then the TOEFL might not matter. I mean, might matter more, sorry.
Thank you, Marci. Okay, so for the sake of time, be the last question. The last question is, what kind of changes can we expect in the new application compared to the one that we completed in previous cycles? Great question. So some new things for the 2020 application cycle include the ability to self-report ADEA scores, as well as the ability to provide official ADEA scores to programs. Applicants can also mark up to 4 of their achievements as their, 4 of their experiences as their most important, and they can also mark 1 achievement as their most important. And also this year, there are application instructions available in the actual application. There's a help center that you can click, and it will provide you with additional instructions. And also in some of the instructional text, there are links that will provide you to tutorials and videos to help you complete the application. So those are some of the main enhancements that you'll see in the 2020 cycle that are new. I want to highlight before we leave some resources that are available to prepare for that cycle, as well as emphasize these application opening dates, which is March 5th, and it will end on February 21st of the following year. The ADEA CAAPID program directory is where you can go to research individual programs. Each program has a profile, and in that directory, we highlight their deadline dates as well as their application requirements. And then there's a link that you can visit to view the application instructions if you're looking for guidance on how to actually enter information in the system. And then lastly, we do have a customer support team that's available via telephone and email Monday through Friday if you have any questions. There's people you can speak with directly to help you get your application submitted. We thank you all for your time and for your participation in today's webinar. Thank you, Marci. We hope that this information was helpful, and we wish you all best of luck during the 2020 ADEA CAAPID application cycle. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Everybody.
Thank you.